This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and dealing with some of the stuff that gets in the way of it. Today's guest is Beryl Crosher-Segers. Beryl grew up in apartheid-era South Africa with a descent that, in her words, made her not quite white enough to enjoy the privileges of being white, yet spared the life of those who were black and banished to live in squalor. Beryl's written multiple books about her experience and her move to Australia later in life, and is now set on helping people find a life of purpose regardless of their life story. Let's welcome Beryl to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much for having me, Laura.
Now, your new book, Living with Purpose, Inspired Living, it really marks almost a full circle healing moment that you found yourself in, which we'll touch on in just a second. But I wanted to ask you, Beryl, your story involves growing up in apartheid-era South Africa, the racial challenges of that time. What do you remember about the segregation that you experienced?
Yeah, so I lived the first part of my adult life in South Africa. And was born into apartheid. I knew no other life than what I was born into. So when in growing up, of course, we were living in our segregated areas. I had no idea until I went to high school, what apartheid really meant. And that, just behind the bushes, on the other side of the railway line, children with white skin, like me, who were my age, were living privileged lives. And because we were kept so segregated, I had little idea of what was happening until teachers and, of course, my father, often talked a lot about the segregation and taught us lots of things. Taught us, firstly, that we are just as good as anyone else. But of course, when you left, walked out your door into the real world, others told you differently, that you were not good enough, that you were a second-class citizen. And so it was all very confusing. So I remember very much, being told to, directed by signs on seats and signs on trains and signs on public buildings. That was my entrance, or that was my seat, or that was my bridge to cross at the railway station, or just those basic things like that other people probably in freer societies wouldn't bat an eyelid to, but my life was directed by signs.
Yeah. How does that affect your sense of identity, that experience of exclusion, but then also not totally fitting into black community and not totally fitting into white community?
Yep. Yeah, we were, very, segregated. So I didn't grow up with black people. I didn't grow up with white people. I only grew up with people who had similar skin tones to mine, or because of their ethnicity, they were put into into these areas. And because we had everything in our area, schools, churches, shops, we didn't have to leave there unless we, had to go somewhere into one of the other areas, or main areas, not residential areas. We were not subjected to some of the really strict rules that surrounded black people, particularly in moving, into or walking around in white residential suburbs. We weren't, because most of our people were coloured people, or non-white as we were classified, worked as servants or, maids to the white people. So they had freer movement, whereas black people needed a permit to go into those areas. So some of those things are always there, even though I've moved on from that and have lived in Australia for this time, I think some of those things are embedded in your psyche. You just always have that sense that you are different. And I'm sure that goes for other people as well.
It's hard to totally get rid of that idea that you're somehow an outsider or, the other, which is a really painful experience to have gone through. And as you say now, something that you still feel to a degree. At the time, and I suppose even now, do you feel like you buried the pain, or is it something that you've spoken up about more so?
Yeah, I have spoken up more, and I do in my book, my first book, my memoir, I do detail our family story about, growing up under oppression and how there are examples in there of coming to Australia and, the challenges, because I left that society where I didn't fit in. And when I came to Australia, I had to start again and always had that sense of being accepted. My accent was different. I looked, my skin color. So I, again, started that process of being accepted.
And it's interesting because your memoir, A Darker Shade of Pale, the response to that was a lot more intense, to put it lightly, than, you expected at the time. And even, as much as we'd like to think that racism, that this kind of racial segregation doesn't exist to the same degree as it did back in your time in South Africa, perhaps even the kind of hatred that you received, it shows that it is still around in some respect. There is, of course, still racism that permeates our society. What forms do you think it takes now?
I can actually handle this racism, arrogance, rudeness of people. I put it down to that. In South Africa, I grew up under legislated racism. And there's a big difference. You can never get away from people there'll be some form of discrimination. You look different, you sound different, but it's not law. It's not the law of the country. And that's where the difference is for people like me. We have avenues. We can stand up for ourselves and not be afraid of being thrown into jail for speaking out or, I guess racism, as you said earlier, there are forms of racism everywhere. And whether I would call it the same level of racism that I grew up with it's different for me because I have a voice here.
And you've used your voice quite powerfully, I think, because in your second book, Behind My Smile, you really spoke about how you got to a place, in this healing journey of being able to speak up a little bit more, understanding the mental health challenges that your experiences had really put you in. What was it that prompted you to actually, take the mask off, to be authentic about just what degree of an impact your life had on you?
When I wrote A Darker Shade of Pale, it was more as a legacy to our future generations. We are the pioneers of our family coming over from South Africa. And I'm very interested in my heritage. And I thought I didn't have much to go on with to look back into. So the purpose of my book, firstly, was to leave a legacy for our future generations. They know where we come from, why we are here, what happened to us, and, so sort of have some history. And when I received the backlash from the book, from certain sectors, I was devastated. I was totally unprepared. I was in this, haze of pride and joy that I had finally written this book and become a published author. And suddenly there were these people who didn't see what I saw. And I had these threats and criticisms and accusations that books like mine was responsible for killing white farmers in South Africa. And I'd get these images in emails or messages to me that, this is what my book is responsible for. And it really troubled me. And I think that the way I grew up, the disadvantage, the oppression, it all surfaced. Some of the things I'd buried, some of the anger and frustration, it all surfaced. And it left me really troubled. after I published that book, the joy was actually not there. I was very traumatized. And when I decided to go and get some healing and just find someone who could work with me, and I wanted to connect to my ancestors. I wanted to just find myself. And I had for so long masked it, and suddenly it was unmasked. And how did I allow that to happen? I went on this journey, and it was I found the right person, was really healing. It was a combination of clinical therapy and holistic and the ancient therapies that helped me to find myself. I was better able to control this bubbling trauma that I needed to address. And I think my healing journey helped me with that and helped me to really look at myself and love myself.
And it can be something that takes a lifetime really to work out that process of healing. But as you are on it at the moment, how has it changed the way that you lived, this redefined sense of self, this redefined sense of joy, of purpose?
As I'm aging, I find that I don't think as much because I was so focused and on white South Africans and their privilege and how dare they today still live under that privilege and not admit that they are at where they are because of my disadvantage. And so those thoughts were always there. I'm being very honest. Those thoughts were always there when I'm very engaged in the South African community, and when I do meet people and they often tell me these stories about how they lived and how they treated their black maids and servants, and I feel like they need to tell me that, and I don't really want to hear that because I know it's not the way they're telling me the story, but I guess it's their coping mechanism and their way of dealing with it as well. And so they tell me things, and I used to be very resentful of that. I'd listen, but I'd not say anything. And now I feel I'm better able to handle those things and not let that anger surface every time.
And it's got to feel good to have arrived at that place, like certainly more liberating and peaceful.
Yes, yeah. And I know that, I guess white South Africans, it used to anger me when they would say to me, oh, we didn't know what was happening to people like you. And I'd get very frustrated when people say that, rather don't say anything. But that condescending remark really frustrated me. But now I look at it, it's their way of coping with their guilt or whatever. Their advantage.
Yeah, and there's a lot, of layers within all of that. But we come to your latest book now, Living with Purpose. It has these daily affirmations, quotes that can help people encourage a bit of daily self-love. What is your hope for the people that do read this book?
I envisage that, people can open that book at any page and find some inspiration. A lot of those quotes used to, I didn't mention before, but after my first book and all the trauma, I was housebound. I couldn't leave my home for many months. And with my healing journey, I, slowly, ventured out. I was very determined to get my life back. And so these affirmations, a lot of them, I created those affirmations in that healing period, and they're the ones that helped me. So I'm hoping that whoever needs words of encouragement will find something in that book. And I've made it into different sections. So there's joy, happiness, peace, grief, cultural diversity. There's a section for everyone. So I hope that people will find what I found in those affirmations.
Is there one that is a favourite that you can share with us, perhaps from the top of mind?
I struggled a lot with grief. My siblings and, that have died and, grieving sort of my past that I feel I was robbed of a normal life. I think also the one, on spreading joy, which is my mission in life. It's not just a fleeting moment of happiness. It's a ripple effect that, will touch the hearts of and souls of everyone around me. That's what I'm all about now, is spreading joy.
Well, let me ask you this one last question, Beryl, because mental health support, we know it is so needed, but we also know, especially with cost of living pressures that people are under, it can be very far down the list in terms of things people will be able to give money to. When mental health support is unaffordable, how do we get around that?
That's one of the things I am very outspoken about, because I struggled myself in finding suitable mental health and support for me, not just clinically but also culturally, that was suitable to what I was looking for. It is expensive and is often a long waiting list of people wanting to use the public health system. Fortunately for me, we, as a family, had to sacrifice so that I could get the help I needed. Those 10 sessions that they so freely advertise and say that's available, it may be available in the public health system, and there's a long waiting list there. If you go to the private practitioners, their fees are much more than that Medicare rebate you get. It does help, but for people who don't have the money, and especially in this time with cost of living, finding $200 in your bank account can be very hard. And to pay for a session, you'd go for 1 hour to see someone, and you may once a month, and your need is so great that 1 hour is insufficient. I know what I was going through, and there was nothing else available for me to go 1 hour to my therapist, and usually they have their clocks in those strategic positions where they can see the time, and that the minutes are ticking away. Your session is over and you are so overwhelmed, and there's so much more you need. And I think, the government should really rethink that, because I know from my own personal struggle that was insufficient. I needed more, and I also needed not to, as a lot of people cannot afford that fee. Firstly, you must have that $200 or $250, whatever they charge in private practice. You must have that in your bank account before you can claim the Medicare rebate.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? If they were able to address this, you make healthy individuals, it's going to help make a healthier society. So hopefully they do make adjustments. I hope so. And I hope that, they include the other therapies that go along with that. It's clinical therapy is not the be-all and end-all of getting mental health treatment. There are other modalities that will aid your healing as much as clinical. Yeah, well, thank you for opening up this discussion for us today, Beryl, and for sharing your book, Living with Purpose. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can rate it, review it, let me know what you think. You can email undistracted@hope1032.com.au. Find me on Instagram @laura.bennett_. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.